Oh, you're
Happy to.
gonna do, okay,
Yep.
cool. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing. Uh, wait, why does it say new share? Not, oh, there, stop share. Okay,
Perfect.
awesome. So yeah, just to do a quick overview, like you said, and then hop right in.
Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen with you folks now. You guys see my screen?
Yep.
Yes. Perfect. So I am selfishly going to absorb just a few minutes kind of talking about my automation journey. I know this is a user group, not trying to sell anything to you guys. So I'm happy to just kind of talk about, kind of how I got to this space, where Lydonia is, and then we'll jump into the meat and potatoes of it. But so thank you folks for the time. My name is Jacob Ortega. I'm very excited to be speaking with you guys. Alteryx has been a part of my life, for the last, gosh, 4 years now. It was a integral part of my, rise into technology consulting and learning about automation. When I was actually back in my undergrad at college, I went to a place called Nichols College down in Dudley, Mass, which isn't actually too far away from Connecticut. And we were, looking to explore back then to see, are automation tools, ready for average business users, namely business students who don't come from a computer science background or understand coding or anything like that, right? What we quickly realized was that not only are they, available and ready and usable, but that we would actually be failing, students, right? If we weren't introducing them to the principles, of automation and the way that it interacts with business process, in the world around us, right? And as I slowly started to learn more, I quickly just became passionate about the space, and got the opportunity to get my hands on Alteryx back in 2020. And I've been developing with RPA tools since right about that time as well, right? And so as I finished out my education and wanted to get myself into the professional world, I knew that I wanted to stay, close to this space, because I knew that it was something that was, not only revolutionizing the world around me, but, was going to be a part of work regardless, from now in the future, and it's only going to get more, more crazy and more useful, right? Ultimately more useful. So at Lydonia, we kind of solve some of these problems. We take a unique approach to some of these problems, right? And I don't want to, bore you guys with slides, but I do just want to touch high level, on where Lydonia kind of fits into this picture for organizations, right? We have a saying, we like to teach customers, how to fish, right? And that really rings true to me as a user of these tools, as a person who's been developing with them. It's easy to start to understand, where does automation kind of fit into my day to day, and how do I start to actually take hold of this, right? So I can start to bring value to not only myself, but my organization. And so we're able to kind of help organizations by sitting in this intersection between three main principles, right? Which is, intelligent automation, being able to automate, digital business processes, utilize, advanced analytics so that we can accelerate, data processing and that actual time to insight, right? So that we can go take actions based off of that. And by doing those two things, we're able to incorporate AI and machine learning so that we can start to make better predictions, either, in the future, or look historically to see, why have these things happen. And Alteryx, has helped us and our customers do that. And so we see this kind of intersection being really powerful, for a lot of organizations. And where they are starting to ask these questions now is, well, maybe I have an existing, imprint of Alteryx, or I have an existing imprint of RPA. How do these things actually interact with each other, right? And so that's a place where we've spent, the better part of the last year really focusing in on trying to figure out, well, where does it actually fit in, right? And so that's what I'm really excited to talk with you guys about, tonight. So before we jump into that, I want to just talk a little high level about, what is RPA, so we can at least have a solid distinction between these two kind of principles, right? So what is RPA? It's emulating human interactions, with these different digital applications. Whether it's logging into those applications, moving files around, extracting data from those files, maybe say PDFs, right? Reading and writing to databases, making more simple calculations, or scraping data out of the web, interacting with the UI, email, and really anything to do with what we do with our hands. And so, we like to use this diagram here when talking about this interaction, right? When we think about the future of the digital workforce, right? We think about both the handwork that we do, mouse and keyboard, and then the head work that we're doing to actually, make calculations, do advanced analytics, start to apply, machine learning, do regression analysis, right? And really start to bring data into a wider view, right? And RPA kind of helps us do that. And so, you know, we might sit there and think, well, if RPA can kind of do both of these things, why not just use RPA, for all of it? We can make calculations with RPA. It's not that difficult, right? But the reality is when we take a look at large sets of data and a high amount of data, it's really difficult to process all of that data from an RPA perspective in a way that Alteryx really can and does with a velocity and speed and accuracy that just makes complete sense to use it. And so in this example with working with a data set like this, if I wanted to make calculations across this entire data set, with RPA, I would have to do it line by line. I'd have to go and identify each row and standardize a set of calculations across each one of those rows. And so maybe that's fine for 20 rows. It's not that intense. But from a development perspective, if I've got hundreds of thousands of rows, never mind millions, right? It just doesn't make sense, right? And so this is why we would use a tool like Alteryx to be able to analyze this data in a way that RPA is just not going to be able to do efficiently, right? It makes far more sense to do that. So, what do we see? What do we see in this by utilizing the best of both worlds? Is we see a large amount of increased efficiency, right? We see cost reduction overall, right, between these activities by minimizing this handoff back and forth between essentially someone either utilizing a robot to do part of this process, then having to analyze data manually or move it somewhere, right? We see improved compliance and risk management by allowing these robots to execute those tasks and then have APA do kind of the backup. Regulatory work, compliance, actually being able to put reports, places, and log data in a way that logically allows us to trace what we're doing, as well as scalability and flexibility, right? The ability to scale these solutions, right, to start to encompass more of the work in the process that maybe singular siloed technology wouldn't really be able to do the way that we can now do, right? And really what this drives towards is an enhanced customer and employee experience, right? We're taking more manual, mundane work out of the employee's hands. We're automating these tasks. We're actually able to automate the decisions based off of the analysis that we're doing with data. And that's ultimately driving towards, just an increased experience for everybody. So the use case we'll talk about today that I'll show you folks really revolves around lending. And I think, pretty much everybody has applied for a loan at some point in their life. I know I did with my student loans. So this might be a little bit different than that, but it's, all still relevant, right? So in this use case, what we're going to simulate, right, is what a maybe credit union or financial institution would be doing to actually process someone who's looking to apply for a loan. So maybe someone goes to a bank's website, or a portal, right? And they're going to actually request, to apply for a loan. Maybe they're actually a member of that bank already, and so they have data on file in a CRM. Maybe they're not, so they might have to supply that data, and we might have to do a process based off of that to actually get them registered in the system. Part of that process is also going to be going out and essentially running their credit to ensure that they're actually credit worthy. And so that's typically done on a third party website, say, some level of government database or an Experian or something, right? So we would have to go take that information that's initially stored, maybe in our, bank CRM, system, right? And we'd have to go take that data and go pull it out to another system, go run it through another application, and then return it back. Once we have that, we can then pass this data off to Alteryx, right? And it can do the financial assessment for us, right? It can look at the prior debt, your existing expenses, what do you have for income, what do you have for assets, for collateral maybe, and start to do some of the assessment work inside of that so that we can ultimately determine, what is the risk of actually granting somebody, this loan. It can also start to record these details. So now we, can be in compliance as people start looking to see what's actually going on. We could actually take this data and plug it into, a risk assessment model, and we could look at risk historically, right? And so ultimately what Alteryx is going to do in this scenario is going to allow us to determine either approve, deny, or just request additional information if we don't have enough, right? And then on the back end, we can pass this information, at least these files, back to an RPA robot, and it can go and do the follow-up, right? It can either go notify a customer and say, hey, you've actually been approved for this loan. Here's your details and how to claim it, right? And we can do that through email. It could also request more information. In the example that we showed in the in the video that we sent along, we actually were able to go take that loan information, go out to a mock interest rate generation application that maybe existed in the bank, and actually go take those details and generate an interest rate based off of what we were able to understand in that financial assessment, right? And then ultimately we can go and do it all over again, right? And so what this will kind of demonstrate is just this kind of ecosystem that we see, right? From, robotic manual action to actually be able to do analysis and then be able to go take action based off of that to enclose this as true end-to-end, process automation from start to finish, right? So before we jump specifically into the use case, just want to make sure that everyone is aware, when we're thinking about using these tools together, Alteryx is ready, right? There are connectors for all of the major RPA providers, right? From Automation Anywhere to UiPath to Blue Prism, right? UiPath is a little more robust because there's actually an activity package inside of UiPath so that we can call, processes from server in Alteryx. And so it kind of goes both ways, right? And that's what we'll actually use today in the example that I'll show you guys. But as you guys start to think about your own existing, environments, workplaces, and if you want to start to, play around with these tools, right, they're ready. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we kind of move through this. So before I move over to the actual demonstration, anyone have any questions off what I've shared so far? We'll take that as a no. Well, thank you. So in this example, it starts when a robot picks up data details or data form entry details. Maybe say from a website. In this example, we're just simulating that. We're going to simulate that data entry form, inside of this workflow, right? And essentially, what's going to happen is a data entry form would prompt here or maybe on that website portal, right? And someone would enter their details, right? And from that point, once they enter those details, we're going to actually save all of those details to a shared file location, right? And then we're going to kick off an API call, simple HTTP request to Alteryx server, and we're going to instruct it to run a workflow through the API. And so when we do that, it launches that workflow in server, and that workflow in Alteryx is actually going to pick up those data files where it was written to, where that customer had written that information to, and it'll actually pull that information in. And so the way we kind of simulate this is with two different data sources, right? Is, hey, someone's going to actually make an active request, right? And the request details are going to be, specific to that user's session, but maybe when they enter those details, they enter their member ID, right? We already have that member ID inside of our, bank's CRM, right? And so we would want to go grab that information, right, from the actual client, CRM. We would pull that information in and combine and join on, the common ID, right? And that'll get our data into a singular place. So now we have, we have the ID, we have the loan request amount, we have all of the information that the customer is requesting, right? We're going to then do some simple calculations to that data, such as changing the date of birth to an actual date and time so we understand how old they are, right? We're going to then do some calculations to determine their debt to income ratio, the loan to income ratio amount, then the overall asset, value that they have to the request, right? And we could think about any sort of parameters or, calculations that a bank might want to make as far as a risk assessment model, right? And so then we'll filter those people out. So if you're under the age of 18, you don't qualify for a loan. That kind of makes sense. Hey, if your debt to income ratio is over, a single integer, we're not going to take that either, right? And so we'll slowly filter all of these different values out into into different streams, right? And so all of the individuals that actually pass this pass these checks, right? They'll get filtered out into accepted applicants, and then everybody that doesn't, they get filtered into denied applicants, right? And so from there, we'll then call UiPath again to have a robot come and pick these, files back up in their local places, right? And then what they're going to do is then they'll go take action based off of those. And if we took a look at that, we took a look at the video, what it's able to do is it's able to take the denied applicants and send them an email saying, hey, thank you for applying, but you haven't been accepted. And then the accepted applicants are able to generate them an interest rate, get that loan detail logged into the bank system, and then ultimately request that they accept that loan so we can start charging them interest, right? And so this kind of shows and simulates this kind of back and forth ecosystem that we see with these two technologies, right? And so with the initial workflow in Studio, right, we could use the Alteryx connector activity package there, right? But we wanted to show and simulate that, hey, you can also do it through API, right? If you want to do more complex things other than just run processes, right? But the reality is that both of these technologies are distinctly different, but highly compatible, right? And so the more that we can use them, the more that we can find use cases to actually apply both of these together. I think the more value that we see as developers, and the less mundane tasks that individuals have to actually do. So thank you guys for taking a look at this. Any questions while I've got it up?
Yeah, Jacob, this very interesting. Thank you. Couple of questions around just the back and forth nature of, well, in this case, just the whole loan approval deny process, right? As you mentioned, there's, there could be some delays in this where you're going off doing background checks, requesting more information. How does the front to back flow, the entire flow, including those delays, happen? Are you calling Alteryx just once, or you have multiple parts throughout the process where you're utilizing Alteryx?
That's a great question, Dan. The way that we see this, right, is we see these, as doing those activities, I don't want to say on their own, right? But if I was going to take that initial bank information and then go run it, to another application, right, so that I could get, credit worthiness or at least a credit check and start that, right, I would have RPA handle that process specifically, and we would kind of batch these together the way that we've done it with Alteryx. So we would wait for that upfront, processing if we have to go through the UI or actually utilize, RPA for that. We'd utilize it and let it run through, right? Save all of that data into variables, right? And then ultimately write it to, that local file that we saw on the first screen, right? And then we would kick Alteryx off, right?
Yeah, so the starting point of this is you have a set of applicants where you have all the needed information, and now you're going to go through and start processing that data.
Precisely. We find that it's a little bit easier to orchestrate kind of the transactional pieces with RPA, especially if if we were to do this with UiPath, we would actually essentially load this into a queue inside of Orchestrator, right? And we would use that as kind of the I want to say the filter or the funnel, but we would use that as essentially the funnel to actually make sure all that data is in one place before we pass it to the next technology, right? Like in the initial kind of example I was running through on the PowerPoint, we want to utilize APA to really chunk through large amounts of data. We can do it transactionally, it's totally fine, but it makes more sense to really save these for batches, right? And allow the robot to assemble a batch before we then go process it, if it makes sense.
What were some of the big advantages that you found aside from, just maybe the speed of processing, moving from pure RPA to RPA plus, using Alteryx in there in the mix. What
RPA.
other advantages?
So I think velocity, the velocity speed is definitely a big piece of it. I think accuracy is another. But I think overall, when we think about a robot replicating these actions across, multiple users, right? There's a significant level of error handling that needs to be put in place, right? If we were to process a batch of these, if we errored out on, individual 15, right, out of 20, it would prevent us from actually moving forward, entirely, right? And so if we think about utilizing Alteryx, in place of that, right, we can ensure that each one of those users' data is captured with RPA, right? And that's simple. And then we can pass it off to Alteryx, and that can do, the more complex kind of calculations, right? We could put more, error handling into the actual data and the calculations here that would make the actual solution, RPA wise, far simpler.
Thanks.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you for the question.
And
I'd like to add to that just a little bit.
Oh, please.
From my personal experience too, like you can definitely do it in RPA, but with UiPath you would need to know some Visual Basic, and there's some development to it, and moving that part or some part to it towards Alteryx, where it's low code, no code, makes it way easier and way more streamlined. So that's also just my personal take on what I gained by adding Alteryx to the RPA mix.
Agreed. Ollie, I'll actually touch on that too, right? So, a part of this, right, is actualizing a solution, as quickly and as concretely as possible, right? So, that definitely plays into why we would use both of these technologies. RPA is low code, no code, but it is code, right? And we do need to understand, coding to really make a hardened, reliable tool or solution. And so by utilizing both of these, we do get kind of the best of both worlds without minimizing, or at least minimizing our exposure, to more intense development.
Yeah, and looking at it from the other side too, like you get the benefits of using stuff like exception handling from UiPath, right? Like let's say that the workflow on server didn't work, it can catch that error and retry it, or do something else, or change the credentials, right? So as exactly like what you say, you get the benefits of both worlds when you combine them together.
And a quick question on the APIs. Maybe not for this example, but in general, do you think it's better to use the robot to run the API, or is Alteryx a better API handler? Or I guess maybe it depends on the situation.
It really kind of depends on the situation.
Okay.
I don't want to leave it as open-ended as that, but from what I've found is, if you can program, simple API, requests, right? You can do it in both ends. I find it to be a little more, I don't want to say difficult, but just a little more intense by utilizing UiPath. It's not as straightforward, say, as Alteryx. But that's kind of where, we would take a look and say it's the same way when we do this, with customers' processes, right? We're taking a look to say, hey, if the applications can talk to each other, might as well just make them talk to each other. And Alteryx and UiPath and all the other, major platforms spend a lot of time building these connectors to make them robust. So why not just use those up on the upfront? But it really just comes down to analyzing, what are you doing? Where's the data going? And ultimately, what's going to allow you to, realize a solution the fastest, right?
Yeah. And so I guess it depends on how many of these types of solutions you built, but what's the most you've gone like back and forth between a robot and Alteryx, like passing through from start to finish of an overall process, but like where you're handing it off back and forth?
It's a great question, a great point. At least in my experience, doing single handoff back and forth really makes the most kind of sense, right? At some point, some level of human interaction is going to need to take, place in there, especially if we're making, large decisions, right? But in theory, right, we could do this as many times as we needed to. If we were updating a model, and this is the way that we kind of think about this, right, in the future, right, is that if we have RPA that's able to go out to these disparate data sources that maybe Alteryx can't interact with, right, gather that data, standardize it into a singular place, allow Alteryx to analyze it, make decisions based off of it, right, ultimately come to some level of conclusion based on that data, we could then go and form some level of, artificial intelligence to then go and determine, well, what should we do based off of that? We can go instruct a robot to then go take action, right? So, the way that we've seen this in application for customers is typically in that kind of that more linear process, right? Where we're using RPA, handing it to APA, utilizing RPA or AI on the back end to actually go take action. And so in process, that's typically what we see. But in theory, I mean, you could pass it back as many times as you needed to.
A related question, Jacob, is I know that you're using files to, to kick off the Alteryx process, through the APIs. You've got those 2 input files, and then when Alteryx is done, it's communicating back to RPA through the output files. Have you had situations, or how do you consider whether you're going to use input files, regular flat files, or even a database, SharePoint, something else, right? Some cloud-based storage. Has that ever been a consideration?
It has been, especially in, context with customers, right? When we look at, their data architecture, right? It really comes down to what are they using and what makes most sense. For simulation purposes, it makes sense to just use, local files or, some level of shared file location. But this is what's highlighting that kind of that reality that, if we have a centralized, database, right, we could use that in place of it, right? And we've experimented with actually just passing this data directly through the API, and, yeah, it kind of works. It makes more sense just to utilize a database if we have it, right? So we simulate this by, using basically SharePoint. So.
Right.
But all good questions. Anyone else? Any other questions? All right. Well, folks, thank you very much. I appreciate you letting me show you guys, kind of what we do here at Lydonia. I'm super passionate about this. So if you guys have any questions in the future about, APA, RPA, really anything automation, I'm passionate about it. I'm happy to talk about it. So you guys have my contact information.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, this was great. Yeah, we I think my company is just starting to dabble in this space where, I mean, they're using robots and we're using Alteryx, but just starting to touch on the combination of the two. So it's definitely a topic that I'm very interested in, just learning more about. So we definitely really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'd love to learn more about what you guys are doing with both of these technologies at Lego for sure.
Yeah, I'm not. We separate the people building the Alteryx side of it and the people building the robotics side. So it's very much team oriented from that perspective. And I haven't had a use case of my own yet to work with them, so I don't really know how they're handling it, but it is being definitely looked at. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'm relatively new there, so I haven't had a whole bunch of opportunities to get involved in many projects. So I'm still in the learning phase there. But yeah, just learning about the robotics in general is super interesting, because it's such a different world than just Alteryx, which is my past 6 years of my life or whatever. So, but yeah, definitely appreciate the talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jacob, I don't know if you mentioned this before, but with the background you gave, the quick background on Lydonia, and Ali for you as well. But aside from the use case that you showed here with RPA and Alteryx, to what extent are you, or are you in the first place? And if you are using Alteryx, what other types of usage are you using it aside from RPA?
Sure.
Like,
So
are you using Alteryx by itself in your practice?
yeah, that's a great question. So when I first showed up to Lydonia, I've been here for a little under a year now. It's been an amazing little under a year. But when I showed up here, we were, really just kind of kicking off our partnership with Alteryx, heavily, right? And we quickly wanted to, do as pretty much every company does is, let's drink our own champagne, right? If this is so valuable for us, why don't we use it ourselves? And so we decided to, embark down that path. And so, we're a sales oriented organization, right? And so a big part of our work is actually identifying, high propensity accounts that we might actually, go and target, right? And so we quickly realized we had all these different data sources from, our different partners, from Salesforce, for marketing campaigns through HubSpot and stuff. And so we were trying to figure out how do we start to leverage all of these, how do we leverage all of these data sources to, help us identify these high propensity accounts? And so, I was quickly tasked with, hey, go figure it out, right? And so, I had been hands-on with Alteryx, for a while at that point, but never really had taken a look at actually building a production, use case, something that was going to be utilized by our organization long term, right? And so, what we were able to do is we were able to take all of those data sources, right, standardize them to a single place, and then start to apply fuzzy matching keys across all the different company names, right? And so very quickly, what we realized was that, hey, there were a lot of customers that, or potential prospects that, hey, maybe they, showed up to, maybe they showed up to an event like this that we held, right? Or maybe they showed up, to Alteryx, Alteryx's conference, right? And maybe they attended our speech there, right? And so we realized that we had all these different data sources with commonalities between them. We were able to pipeline them into a single place. And then we were able to actually tally those individuals, or those individual counts up to say, hey, this person showed up to, Alteryx's conference. They showed up to one of our webinars. They attended our, speech or our dinner that we had there. They probably want to have a conversation about this. They're probably really interested, right? And so we were able to very quickly take all these different data sources and start to quickly identify, where are these individuals who have appeared across all these different data sources? Who are they? Why were they interacting with us? And, how can we best, serve them, right? And so that work was supposed to be completed by interns over the summer. And the reality was that if we had done that manually and tallied all those different account names, we, thousands of accounts, right? It just doesn't make sense to do that manually if we can utilize a tool like Alteryx and do it, within a couple weeks max. So, so we're utilizing that here. We're also utilizing Auto Insights. We're seeing a lot of value, out of all of the different kind of tooling inside of Alteryx, and we're happy to, show that, hey, we like this tool, we use it, and you should too. So
Just
while you were talking, because I had some similar experience with the fuzzy matching, and it was a very similar use case. It was across the recruiting space, and if you can imagine, you're getting a candidate applying for a job, and
yeah,
it could have been 10 years ago that you met with them, and you want to know all that information. So you've got to gather the information from all these sources and make some intelligent decisions on, did we speak to them? Have we ever had any contact with them? And if so, how far along in the pipeline did they get? So very similar. Are you using, one follow-up question, are you also using Alteryx to service any of your clients as opposed to just internally, aside from RPA?
We are actually, we're actually currently in the middle of a more prolonged exercise, really taking a hard look at our financial operations, and some of the processes that exist inside of that, try to assist customers, from the actual procurement phase all the way to, billing and servicing afterwards, right? I think another area we're going to start taking a look at that is actual project management, because we do a lot of service and, delivery work with our customers. So being able to look at, how projects are actually being, run, and some of the data points, inside of that, we have standardized data forms for that. So why not do some analysis on top of it to see, hey, maybe some of, if we had projects with more severe blockers, how does that actually, impact, project delivery timelines, right? So starting to do some of that benchmarking internally. We really just, every single time we look, we find more opportunities to use it. And so it keeps us on our toes for sure.
I don't know about anybody else, but I'm a bit jealous because in a couple of places that I've consulted at, we've had great success in pockets, but there's so many other tools and so many other things going on that siloed success doesn't necessarily permeate throughout the organization, and it's just hard to keep Alteryx going and make a use case for it. I think, Dan, you found the same situation.
Yeah, I'm definitely trying to show people its value. It's not as well known at Lego right now. I think we only have like 40 licenses, and there's something like 28,000 people that work there. Some number like that. I'm not 100% sure what it is, but yeah. So it's something that I'm trying my best to show that it can do some amazing things. And oddly enough, the first thing that I produced was a fuzzy match tool. So an analytic app with fuzzy match in it. So that's like the one of the most complicated things in Alteryx. I have such trouble wrapping my head around it whenever I have to dive into it and look at it and use it. I really have to sit there and think while I'm building it to make sure I'm doing it correctly, because it is drag and drop, but it's not really drag and drop, for that tool. So that's when you really got to pay attention when you're building.
Fair. Sounds like you guys are due for an AIP.
Sounds like a plan.
Well, very
yeah.
good.
So we had on our agenda just a couple, and I'm in full screen mode. I got to get out of. Just to really talk about open discussion on some of the new features that Alteryx has unveiled in the past few months. They are things that I don't currently have access to, so I can really only talk a little bit high level on them. So I really want it to be an open discussion, especially for people that have them and are using them. But things like the control containers, the missing macros upgrade that they've talked about recently, and the auto documentation, which I think it uses ChatGPT to do it. I could be wrong there, but really just wanted to talk about those items and sort of how they just kind of help propel the tool even further with that functionality. Tom and I went through the control containers a bit. He looked at it a bit more than me because he has a newer version of Alteryx. I'm still on 2022.1.
For that one, Dan, I can, depending on the interest level in it, how many people, first of all, know about control containers and are using it? Jacob, you, Ali?
Yeah.
That's a yes, yeah?
Yeah.
How about Larry, Dan, Alex, Deepankar?
I haven't seen them yet.
No, not for me.
No. I'll just spend a couple of minutes on it then, and then we can just have a discussion on it. Let's see. I can do this. Yeah. So, you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
So this is just the community information on it and what it is, but basically, before control containers, you have the regular tool container, which you would just use that to organize a group of tools, and it wasn't controlling anything else, right? It wasn't, you could disable it, right? All the tools in it, but it wasn't controlling sequence. It wasn't, taking any data into the whole container or outside of the container. It was done through the individual tools. So now you can see that this control container up here has an anchor on the input side, and it has an anchor on the output side. And so there's a couple of different use cases in which, it'll make life easier for you potentially compared to what tools you've had available to you in the past. So here's an example here where you have a text input, could have any number of records coming into it. And because you have something going into the control container, right? First, if you didn't have anything, if you just used it like a regular container, it would work just like the regular tool container. And it would execute, if there was no input, it would execute just like anything else, but Alteryx would control the sequencing, right? You wouldn't have control over that. Here, this is saying, because I have something coming in, the tools inside this container, if there are any, all of that code is just going to execute if there's at least one input record. So if there's no records, nothing inside there runs. So here's the first example. This is just like the regular container, no input. The output is going to be log information. That's by default. That's what you see here on the right-hand side. So the regular messages that you get, that you see when you run an Alteryx workflow, this is a little bit more directed because now, or specific rather, because you're going to get the messages that apply to all the tools in this container. And so if you wanted to write out like log messages somewhere, you now have a mechanism to write these out. If you wanted to keep track of the errors or even conditional execution based on whether your process had errors or not, you could do that. We're going to get to my favorite one in a second, which is this one here. So basically what this says is I'm now controlling the sequence of what's in these containers. That first container is going to run, and if there's an input record, and we know that there's going to be at least one record coming out because that's the log messages. But you're using that to say that I'm only going to execute container 13 after I execute container 1. And that's pretty important if you've been using things like block until done, for example. This kind of renders that obsolete.
Yeah.
The other thing I should mention is that there are prerequisites for using the control containers. You got to be on Alteryx 2023.1 patch, and you have to have the multiprocessing, the AMP engine has to be enabled. What's interesting is I started playing around with this, and then the code that I had in there, I was running a test. I had one block of code that was using block until done, and I had another one with the control containers, and it said, you can't use block until done if you're using control containers. So it wouldn't work. Let me just switch to an example. I don't know, certainly Jacob and Ali, I don't think you were on the last call. I'm not sure who was on it, but we had a use case where we were showing different ways, different ways that you could solve the problem of trying to write to different sheets in the same Excel file. And one of the problems you have is that because it's sequential, you'll get a file lock. That's what the first one does. It basically is going to error out because there's nothing controlling the order. So all of these 3 sheets are being written to potentially at the same time, right? There's nothing controlling that, and it's going to cause an error. So what we did is we basically said the first solution we came up with was block until done. And we got to union all the data together because block until done is going to use all the same data as the input. And then you got to filter the data and you can control the sequence. And now that's going to work. We also showed a second example of how to solve the problem, a little bit more creative, where you've got the same 3 Excel sheets being written to. This time we're using block until done, and we're using a creative feature of the record count to basically create a single record in here, is the record count, but then we're going to get rid of the record count using append fields, and you notice that we don't select that. So basically what we're doing is we're redefining on the fly this workflow coming into the second sheet is now everything that we need for the second sheet. We just drop the record count and we're using block until done. In my opinion, they're all a little bit, they work. They're a little bit more complex than you'd like to have, and that's because we didn't have a true way to control execution. Now, if I take that same scenario, now I'm using the control container and I don't have to do any block until done. I don't have to use record counts. I don't have to union the data. This is all the data I want for my first sheet, and it's going to run first. And then the output of that is the log messages, which you can see here. Those are the log messages. And that is going to make sure that this container doesn't execute until the first one is done and all the output log messages are received. And now I'm controlling the order of the second set of data that's going to write to my second sheet in Excel, and so on for the third one. So I kind of like this one in that it shows you there's 3 or 4 different ways to solve this particular use case. Aside from that, I think there are a couple of other ways that you could use the control containers, but as far as what I've been using it for, I think just the simple way of controlling very simply the order of the execution is a big win.
Yeah.
I was surprised to see that in reading through the information, it said that this was a very highly requested feature by the community.
Yeah.
I didn't
It
realize
was
that.
#1 on the
Yeah.
idea community.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm curious for Ali and Jacob, I did notice reading through the community, and I haven't had the experience with this, there are some negative, at least comments from users saying, hey, great job, Alteryx. We love this. But why did you require the AMP engine to be enabled? And the reason they said that is because there's known problems with the AMP engine. And one of them they mentioned was the APIs and proxies, and it kind of messes with the APIs. So if you have that problem, you can't really use the control containers if you have to disable AMP. I'm curious if you guys ran into that since you just showed you using APIs.
I haven't. I've been using it. I've been using AMP the whole time. I haven't seen any problems with it.
That's good to know. Maybe those things were a little bit older. I didn't look at the dates and they've been solved, so that's good to hear.
Yeah, same. I've heard of some of the processing, I don't want to say problems, but at least the interferences with the AMP engine, but I haven't encountered them, at least working with the tool.
Yeah, great.
Quick question. We didn't touch on this yesterday when we were chatting, Tom. The log items that come out of the containers, do you have to like union each of the outputs of the containers to get all of the log items, or is it cumulative at the end of the last one? Do you know what
I believe it's just for these 3. It's just for the tools that are in there. Each one.
So if you wanted everything, you'd have to union them all together. And okay.
Correct.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep. Now I'm trying to think if there was anything else that was in there. This is the writing multiple outputs. That's the one we just saw. Now this happens to be a database. The other thing I saw is if you, I don't know why you want to do this, but let's say you, in the same workflow, you wrote to an Excel file, and in another part of your workflow, you want to read back that same file. Now you could do that because you could use the control containers to say, only read the file back in once it's completed writing. So right here, that's that one, right? So I'm writing out a file, and now I'm going to read it back in the same file, but I know it's there available because I'm not running this code until this one's done. Conditional branching, obviously, if you want to put a bunch of logic in here and here, you can control the order of how it executes. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool feature. I just wish I was on a newer version of Alteryx to be able to use it. And then, yeah, the other items, the missing macro one, that is functionality that I don't know if anyone's experienced that when they've moved workflows back and forth from the server. Things tend to get disconnected if it's not done, the right way. But from what I've seen, and I unfortunately can't share any of that because I don't have any workflows like that. Oh, who is that?
Yeah, hi, this is Dipankar.
Oh,
Can
hi.
I just make a comment? Hi, how are you? This is the first
Good.
time I'm joining in. Great insight, Jacob and everyone. I just want to share one thing. So I do work, so I'm senior manager data science. I work on Alteryx, Python, and a lot of integrations for building predictive models and forecasting, doing a lot of data-driven marketing. I think the missing macro is something like, I designed the flows, like our team is ramping up from the Alteryx. We are buying more licenses and building more bigger stuff, building products. But what I see is essentially I designed one of the flows and I found that few of the flows started showing a question mark at places where it could be a container, a part of the container, or it could be outside the containers. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to actually touch base with someone who actually can look into what could be the possible reasons as to how we can get that resolved. Thank you.
Yeah, that would have to be basically, I don't know if you have a licenses directly through Alteryx, but I would go to your customer success manager or you can put on the community, you can log a support ticket. I can try and find the page and the link and I'll drop it in the chat. But you can also go that way to get assistance, and it's all going to depend on what sort of contract you have with Alteryx. If they'll be able to support you, or if you get your license from a third party vendor, you'd have to probably go through them to get some resolution there. Let's see, support. I could probably share my screen and just show you.
Sure.
Crap, I'm on my home computer. I don't have my Alteryx password, so unfortunately I won't be able to show you, but because I don't remember it saved on my other computer. But I'll drop the link into the chat, and then you can just explore.
So the way they did it, they changed it. It used to be a link on community where you can put a ticket. Now they gave everyone their own mission control launchpad as part of Mavericks. So once you go there, you'll be able to submit a new case and you can track it and you can see who's handling it and all that. But it's exactly the same thing. They just rebranded it a bit.
Yes, thank you for saying that. I honestly completely forgot about Launchpad.
Me too. I just tried it now, and that's what I've seen. So that's
all right.
It was knowledge to me too. So thank you.
Yeah. Were you kicking that off, Ali, from within Alteryx, right?
Yeah. Either Alteryx or from community. So anywhere you try to put support Alteryx, it's going to take you there. It's going to ask you to log in. And once you log in with your credentials for the license, you'll be able to see it.
Yeah. See, so here's, if you're in the community, there's support, and then you go down to support.
And there you go.
It wants to get you into the Launchpad, which requires you to log in. So it's but yeah, they'll definitely be able to at least point you in the right direction if you do in fact have a third party that sold you the licenses and whatnot. But yeah, that functionality where it will allow you to sort of trace back the location of the last known macro that was in that will allow you to not be scrambling and trying to find whether it's in your own macro repository, wherever you have it saved on OneDrive or LAN or whatever, or if it's buried somewhere on the server. So that functionality should help save a lot of time because we all know that documentation of workflows can be lacking sometimes. So to find those items, especially after like 6 months or a year of it being out on the server, like there's really no way to remember that unless it's well documented. So this kind of helps with that issue.
Right. Because just to add, because we have a really complicated flows which we have designed, and we try to troubleshoot around try to do a back engineering as to track down, okay, what all flows, what all dependency macros we need to run the flows. But however, right, as rightly mentioned that, there could be few things which you are not under your control or could be some other technical reasons. So I'm definitely going to raise a ticket today and on this support page, and hopefully it should get resolved in a few days. Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck with that. I'm sure they'll be able to help you. They've always been great. I mean, I haven't raised, usually like at my old job, I would go directly to our customer success manager with my questions and issues. But I have raised a few support tickets through that process, the old process on the server, on the community, but it's still the same people getting the ticket. And they've been great, helping out, answering my questions and getting resolution pretty quickly. And then the last one that I had that is of personal interest to me, but I don't have access to it, is the auto documentation. I had a coworker explore it a little bit, but because it uses AI, we don't have at least I don't have the newest version anyway, but we were told not to use it because of that AI component as of now. So if anyone has experience with it and would like to talk about it, I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, I show it all the time, especially when I'm talking to. I use it too because when I want to show someone a workflow, I don't want to go. I could go through it. Alteryx is great, but what I do, I just drop it in there. I run it. It goes.
Yeah, because it's a family picture. But just understand that if I'm printing it on that, it's quite a bit more expensive. Is we have to cut it down from the banner. It's like
No. So what I do, I would run it. All you need to do is it uses, I think, a couple tokens. So depending on how big your workflow is, it's going to use some in OpenAI credits, and then it gives you a nice paragraph. It gives you a title. It gives you a description, and it also puts in your metadata too. And what the best thing about it is you can show it the directory, and it does it for all of them. So next time you open your workflow, you go to the metadata, you can see the description for it, and it's pretty accurate. Like it tells you what you've done. You upload it to Auto Insights, or you've done it to a CSV file. It's a good way, so you can always go in there and see what's happening. So
okay, so when I went to Inspire back in May, they were saying you could do it at the tool level, the container level, or the entire workflow level.
Yeah.
And is it just like you drop down the menu and it's one of the choices now? It's not like a tool that you bring in, or
oh no, it's a tool. For now, it's a tool where you bring it in and you just put it there, and then it runs itself, and you can put a browse tool to see what it's doing, and then you can use those results to put them somewhere wherever you want. They have the other one where you're using OpenAI exactly. Like if you're giving it prompts, you're giving it paragraphs you want it to summarize, it can do that too. And they just added last week, and it's something Jacob and I were looking at with Auto Insight. They added playbooks. I highly suggest you take a look at that. It's very good.
okay. Yeah, Auto Insights is something that really interests me. We don't currently have licenses for that, unfortunately, but I've seen it at the last 2 Inspire conferences, and it's such a cool
Cool. Yeah.
tool set.
It always has been a nice to have, but with the addition of playbooks, I think now people will actually start getting it. Because what that does is basically give it a scenario. Let's say I'm a sales manager, want to increase my revenue. It gives you use cases. It explains the use cases, gives you dummy data, synthetic data, builds the reports for you, builds the missions, does everything for you. And then once you see something you like, you take it, adopt it, put your own data to it. And that way you don't have to worry about, well, how am I going to structure my data? Where am I going to get it from? How do I build these reports? What is even a good use case to increase my revenue, right? Maybe I'm not a sales manager, I'm a data analyst. I don't know what marketing does. So it does all that for you, and it takes a couple of minutes. And me and Jacob has been playing around a lot recently with it. I think it's pretty cool. Yeah.
It is really cool. It's like Auto Insights at first was like, it's awesome, right? And it's cool to kind of see, especially from a demo perspective, right? They have a couple really nicely curated data sets in there. And so it's cool to be able to show it, drill into it and really like discover where, what they envision. And then as we started to explore with our own data, right, we, said, okay, well, let's go do a full export of Salesforce and just give it to it and see what happens, right? And so we were able to do some kind of surface level analysis, but what we realized was that to really make use out of a product like Auto Insights, you have to do a lot of data curation, right? And really understand what are the data points that I'm looking for, what are the use cases, or at least the insights that I'm trying to understand. And once you understand that and can curate, the data that it needs, it's really powerful. But it was kind of missing that kind of portion of, allowing you to really understand it. So with playbooks now, you can simulate this with, dummy data, but then it gives you the data table structure. So you can see the different data points that they're using to actually produce these insights. And now it's simple, just kind of mapping those, to what I have, right? So it's really cool.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly they've built that up and continued to build it up, because they only bought what was the name of that company they bought?
Hyperana.
Hyperana, yes, thank you. That was only a few years ago.
Yeah, a couple of years.
Yeah, they're moving real fast in that space, which is really cool, because even seeing it in at the Denver Inspire, in 2022, it was just so much can be gained really quickly with just dropping some data in there. I know, like you said, there's some work to be done in there to get it to really show you what you want to see, but it's not months and months of work there to get it up and running. You can really jump in and start looking at stuff and really getting an idea of what your business is doing and where it can go relatively quickly, at least compared to the old world before tools like that existed. So
yeah,
I just I don't know, stuff like that's just really cool and interesting to me. And like I mentioned to Jacob in one of our past conversations, we also use a tool like Celonis, and that those types of insights that you can get from Auto Insights and Celonis and comparable applications are it's just amazing where the world of data analytics is headed. So it's just exciting to be part of. It's one of the reasons I wanted to do this user group and just have an opportunity to talk about data more often than I do already. Do we have a time check? What is it? We're over.
Just very quickly on, I think, you're talking about auto documentation. Is there an installation required for that? Because I don't actually have the tool, and I've got the recent patch.
Yeah. They still didn't put it out of the box. You need to go look for workflow summary. Basically, that's what they're calling it right now. Yeah.
Okay. And then it'll just, once you do that, it has the tool available.
Yeah, and then you drop it down into your workflow and you're good to go.
I was wondering why I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I thought they would do it in 23.2, but they didn't. Probably they want to have something more robust and add more to it, right? It's pretty simplistic for now.
Yeah.
Awesome. So this was a great session. Really appreciate everyone's participation. And Jacob, thank you very much for taking the time to present the robotics use case. Personally, it's such an interesting topic to me. So I appreciate that. And I'm sure everyone else does as well. And then everyone else that watches this recording after the fact will appreciate it too. So,
thank you guys. It's something I've been passionate about for years. I'm lucky enough to get to live it every day. So thank you guys for giving me another opportunity.
And Dan and I have some time to put our heads together for content for the next, we got a couple of months, but if anybody has anything that you feel is of interest, whether you want to, present yourselves or a topic that you'd like to hear about, please let us know.
Perfect.
Yeah. Just either reach out directly on the community, post in the user group message board, or just send a direct message to Daniel G on the community. Feel free to reach out that way. And maybe we can even see if Flavia can get someone to come in and talk some Auto Insights with us from Alteryx. That'd be pretty cool too to hear directly from them on that as well. So yeah, just feel free to reach out whenever, and Tom and I will work on next session, get something cool going.
Perfect.
But everyone have a good holiday season, and we'll reconvene in the new year.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
folks. We'll
Bye.
see ya.
Thank you, everyone.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.